Space is vast beyond imagination. Galaxies number in the trillions, great swirling celestial masses that are of unfathomable size, even by themselves. Within each one, there could be hundreds of billions of stars, orbited by trillions of planets, orbited by quadrillions of moons, surrounded by quintillions of comets, and more. But from the perspective of us tiny little humans here on Earth, one single molecule is more important than all the rest combined. Water. A seemingly unremarkable union of one oxygen atom and two hydrogen atoms, water is so simple as to be almost ignored. But in truth, water is everything. It stands between Earthlings and our understanding of the universe. It enables our own species to survive and thrive. It is the foundational presence that facilitates the creation of life and that signals potential as we explore the cosmos around us. It's water that will take us across the cosmos, water that will guide us to our destination, and water that will see us survive the voyage. If beauty is in the eye of the beholder, then behold water. Perhaps the most beautiful thing of all. Now, before we even consider anything from its critical importance to living things to its place in the cosmos, we've got to take just a moment and emphasize just how special water really is. The formula to create it is really simple. 1 oxygen, 2 hydrogen. Just like we said before. But for reasons that scientists still don't fully understand, water is one of the strangest chemical compounds known to man. This is a substance with a solid form that can float on top of its liquid form, a substance that expands when it freezes rather than contracting. A layer of solid water ice can insulate and heat a body of liquid water below, even as its gaseous vapor moves through the open air. Cycles of freezing and melting can lead water to pass through, rupture, and break apart objects that humans consider impermeable without the use of tools, everything from trees to rocks to chunks of metal. Okay, let's take a quick detour because we need to talk about a little thing called media bias. Now, we all know that feeling. You're scrolling through the news, but everything's starting to sound just suspiciously similar, right? It's like you're in an echo chamber where every headline seems to be just nudging you towards a particular point of view. Whether it's selective reporting or just outright bias, it's tough to know whether you're getting the full story. But that's where today's sponsor, Ground News, comes in. They're an app and a website designed to do one thing: help you cut through that noise. Ground News pulls together articles from over 50,000 sources worldwide so that you can see how different outlets are covering the same story. Political leanings, reliability, ownership, they lay it all out for you, backed by ratings from independent organizations. And just to prove it works, let's have a look at a real example. So apparently, Donald Trump's got plans to nominate Fox News host, this is a little bit out of date, isn't it? Pete Hegseth as his defense secretary. That happened. The story was blowing up, covered by a whopping 182 sources, but here's the kicker. According to Ground News, 47% of these sources are centered, while the rest, well, they're either leaning left or right. You've got left-leaning outlets focusing on Hegseth's past controversies, while right-leaning ones are all about his military credentials and love for the troops. Plus, they've also got the blind spot feature, which shows stories one side of the political spectrum is completely ignoring. Imagine that, news that you never even knew existed because your network doesn't want you to see it. With Ground News, you can scroll through these perspectives side by side to see how the headlines change depending on who's reporting it. Right now, Ground News is offering a special deal. You can get 50% off their Vantage plan using my link. That's the one I have. It's fantastic. Just head over to ground.news/astrographics or scan the QR code on the screen now. Big thank you to them for sponsoring, and now back to today's episode. Hot water freezes faster than cold water. Its liquid form sticks to itself and nearly everything else, but dissolves almost anything it touches at the same time. Liquid, solid, and gaseous water can exist under the right conditions in the very same room. Nothing about any part of that is normal compared to all of the other known matter in the universe. And while we're going to spare you the chemistry lesson today, the same hydrogen bonds that make water so very strange on its own are the same fundamental properties that make water so critical to life itself. Water on its own isn't enough to create a living organism. In fact, it's made up of just 2 of the 6 primary elements that biologists believe to be essential in the process of abiogenesis, that is, creating a living organism when there wasn't one before. Hydrogen, carbon, nitrogen, oxygen, phosphorus, and sulfur are all thought to be essential to this process. So is the presence of an external source of energy that's got to avoid being destructive while also being continuous and consistent, like, for example, a hydrothermal vent on the ocean floor. But while the energy source exists to sustain a life form and initiate the process that creates it, and the various building blocks of life are meant to structure into organic molecules, it's water that does, well, basically everything else. At its most basic, water is a facilitator. It's here, in a chemically simple but incredibly potent fluid, that the essential elements for life can come into contact with each other, not just by bumping into each other, but by interacting chemically. Water's hydrogen atoms are bonded to its oxygen atoms with strong but breakable bonds that, once broken, result in the presence of free hydrogen and oxygen atoms that are bonded to one hydrogen atom but are open to another connection. Water is highly chemically reactive, and it's corrosive. It'll break down just about anything, at least a little bit at a time, and it can create chemical bonds with an incredible range of other substances. In part, water facilitates chemical reactions between elements like carbon and sulfur and nitrogen because water is the compound that starts the process of swapping around chemical bonds with the substances immersed in it. Somewhat akin to that one friend who can start a party just about anywhere with just about anyone, it's water that initiates a much larger process of chemical interaction, breaking down barriers of entry and starting a free exchange. Not only that, but water acts as a facilitator in another way, flowing in complex currents, where in elementally rich environments the building blocks of life are all bound to slosh by each other at some point. And once a living organism does exist, water is absolutely indispensable to the most basic living thing, the cell. Whether in single-celled organisms or more complex multicellular ones, cells rely on water to enable all of their most critical functions. It's water that provides a medium for any and all chemical reactions that take place inside cells. It's water that props them up from the inside and maintains their shape. It's water that allows for the transportation of nutrients and waste around and out of the cell, and it's water that regulates movement of all substances across the cellular membrane. The mere fact that oil and water don't mix is the fundamental distinction that enables cells to structure using the materials available to them. Without water, cells cannot exist as we know them. Without enough water, cells are guaranteed to stop working, no matter what else happens. In more complex organisms, especially animals and plants, water is responsible for the survival of the entire machine. It's the substance that allows cells to reproduce and that allows for the transfer of nutrients all across a living body, whether that body is made of flesh, plant matter, or something else entirely. In animals, water in the bloodstream enables delivery of oxygen. Water allows the body to cool through the lungs and sweat, and water is fundamental to the structure of joints, which in turn allow living things with skeletons to move. It collects waste. It serves as a primary disposal method. It allows for essentials like saliva and mucous membranes, and it enables digestive processes by which precious resources are extracted from food. In most of an animal's body, whether vertebrate or invertebrate, water is the central component that allows everything else to work. That's true for soft tissue, it's true for organs, it's true for bones, and it's true for everything that invertebrates contain inside their exoskeletons. In some cases, it's even the science that literally allows some invertebrates to hold themselves together. Zoom out one more time. Water is fundamental not just to the maintenance of living things, but to the worlds in which living things have learned to thrive. It's the movement of water from its liquid form to its vapor form and back that forms the churning behavior of our atmosphere. It's abundant liquid water all over the vast majority of the Earth that allows for incredible marine ecosystems, yet allows for living things to travel far inland and sustain themselves. Earth's oceans help to regulate the planet's climate. Its stores of frozen water expand and retract across the land to stimulate vast and critical changes. The first known species to form a civilization, we humans that is, have learned to harness water in all its forms, from building irrigation and erecting great dams to learning how to navigate the oceans to leveraging steam as the power source that kicked off the entire industrial revolution and built our modern world. Of course, when we discuss the importance of water for living things, we've got to include a caveat. Although we here on Earth can study an abundance of living organisms, we're also dealing with a sample size of precisely one. We've got one planet, one evolutionary tree to examine, and we simply don't have data to say that life could never be possible without water. Perhaps with some other fluid medium like ammonia and with other fundamental building blocks of life like silicon, some weird and wonderful sort of life might be possible. What we do know is that our type of life could not exist if water wasn't a central component of our world. There is no alternative substance that can do what water does, and if water disappeared tomorrow, it'd all be over. But even in some horrific hypothetical where water on Earth did suddenly disappear, it is incredibly abundant across the rest of the universe. That's true for the celestial bodies located practically on humanity's doorstep and for the furthest corners of observable reality. In our own solar system, water can be found in the unlikeliest of places, and that water, at least the majority of it, is old. Modern studies on the ices of the solar system have found that those ices predate even the existence of our sun, born from a nebula some 4.6 billion years ago. Water can be found on Mercury in shadowed craters where the planet's temperature still can't melt it. There's very little of the stuff on Venus now, but the climate models strongly suggest it was once an ocean world before being overtaken by runaway greenhouse effects. Water is clear to see on the surface of Mars, almost always as polar permafrost and under the Martian soil. As 2024 findings via the InSight lander have showed, there may be an entire ocean's worth of liquid water underneath the surface. Water can be found in the atmosphere and the rings of Jupiter and Saturn, while Uranus is believed to contain so much highly condensed, so-called superionic water that it could fill Earth's oceans 50,000 times over. Neptune's mantle is believed to include an ocean layer of superhot water that's rich in ammonia, as well as an inner layer of superionic water like Uranus. But within the bounds of our solar system, no source of water besides Earth is more incredible than the many frozen moons of the 4 gas giants. Orbiting the planet Jupiter, the thick, icy crust of the moon Europa bears ridges, linear features, and pushed-up plates, but few impact craters, suggesting an outer layer that's constantly regenerated by a liquid subsurface ocean. The Europa Clipper probe, launched in October of 2024, will arrive there in the year 2030 to perform dozens of flybys for further study. Orbiting Saturn, the moon Enceladus almost certainly has liquid water, given its propensity to blast plumes of frozen water up to several thousand miles high from underneath its icy shell. That water sprays across Saturn's orbital system, helping to form its rings, and some scientists believe possibly even shooting out frozen life forms that could travel through the solar system and beyond. Jupiter's moons Ganymede and Callisto are thought to have deep oceans underneath thick surface ice layers, while Saturn's moon Titan is believed to have both a salty subsurface ocean and surface seas and rivers filled with liquid ethane and methane. The moon Triton in Neptune's orbit is stunningly active given its distance from the sun, and it too is thought to have a deep subsurface ocean even in the far depths of the solar system. Even the dwarf planet Pluto bears long, inexplicable fault lines on its surface, suggesting that under its icy shell, a subsurface ocean still flows. Step back a little bit, focus on water in all its forms instead of just liquid, and the solar system is even more impressive. After all, this is a place where there's enough water to create oceans on several planets at some historic point, maintain vast oceans in 2 gas giants, totally encase many moons with it, at times with hundreds of miles of ice crust, and still have so much more to spare. And when it comes to the excess water that's separate from planets or moons, there is one sort in particular that bridges the gap between our solar system and interstellar space. That water comes in the form of comets, frozen collections of ice and dust that can be tens of miles wide and leave trails that stretch millions of miles in their wake. Traveling through the solar system as gargantuan snowballs, some comets come close enough to Earth that we can see and catalogue them. About 3,700 such comets have already been tracked by terrestrial scientists, but if some estimates are to be believed, then there could be billions of the little icy bodies out there lurking just within the gravitational pull of our sun, far in the Kuiper Belt and the Oort cloud beyond Pluto. But comets aren't just a phenomenon of our solar system, and nor are they constrained to it. In 2017, a passing interstellar object called Oumuamua might not have left a tail as it flew by the Earth, but it was a comet nonetheless. As comets formed in places where water was more abundant than it probably was in Oumuamua home system, can carry that water from system to system for as long as they survive. Another interstellar comet, 2L Borisov, did leave a tail as it passed, and even broke off an icy fragment as it passed through our solar system. According to recent research, our entire home galaxy may be rich with watery objects. As a 2021 study validated, Earth and its solar siblings are most likely formed from space dust in a process called pebble accretion. That is a process by which little specks of dust and ice snowballed into bigger specks of dust and ice for millions upon millions of years, until they accrued into protoplanets and finally planets. But if Earth is, as scientists assume, fundamentally unremarkable in that way, then such a process would create abundant watery worlds in other solar systems, perhaps making the presence of liquid water on the average planet a simple question of whether that planet is in the star's habitable zone. It's difficult to know just how common water is in the Milky Way specifically, but if it's anywhere near as common as it is around our star, then watery bodies, either in solid or liquid form, could be everywhere. And all across our galaxy, and in fact all across our universe, liquid water may flow and even support life in the depths of interstellar space. Scientists know full well that there are planets out there in the void, potentially even trillions of them in the Milky Way. Assuming again that we live in a relatively normal solar system in a relatively normal galaxy, it would be nearly impossible for trillions of those planets to exist, but simultaneously for watery worlds to be rare among them. While those planets themselves almost certainly wouldn't feature liquid water, adrift and unbelievably cold in deep space, their moons are a different story. Heated by the tidal forces of their host planet, those moons could very possibly feature subsurface liquid oceans of their own. And with trillions of rogue planets out there, oceans on rogue moons may be among the most abundant sources of liquid water out there. Across the entirety of the known universe, water is the most abundant molecule by far, aside from simple molecular hydrogen. What that means for other galaxies is very difficult to know for sure. After all, human scientific instruments are about as capable of looking closely at water in solar systems within other galaxies as you are of spotting a particular grain of sand on the moon using a pair of binoculars. But if scientific understanding of Earth, the solar system, and the Milky Way is normal for our universe, then water on frozen worlds, water on great surface oceans, and water in comets streaking across the cosmos may be just as fundamental to our universe as light or the force of gravity. Water is critically important to life as we know it, and water is phenomenally abundant in our universe, but it also holds the potential to carry humanity to the stars. If human civilization will ever break out of our solar system for good, it'll almost certainly be water that takes us there as the building block of our species' spacefaring future. Among the countless attributes that make water so special is the fact that its two component elements, hydrogen and oxygen, just happen to be the components for rocket fuel. Powered by liquid hydrogen and liquid oxygen propellants, rockets fly to space even today on the basis of this simple fuel source. But in spaceflight, getting materials out of Earth's atmosphere is incredibly costly. So costly, in fact, that it is the single greatest limiting factor to humanity's efforts to explore space. Sending more material to space drives up costs in an unsustainable way, and getting enough liquid hydrogen and liquid oxygen reserves to space for craft that could travel long distances just isn't worth it. But manufacturing the fuel for a spacecraft using materials that are already in space and never have to be launched from Earth at all has long been regarded as the holy grail that would make large-scale space exploration possible. And water here is the key. Find and capture chunks of water floating through space and bring them to space-based infrastructure that's capable of converting that water into usable fuel, and that's the ball game. Manage that, and all sorts of other operations in space become feasible. With water powering the whole process, spacecraft could be built in orbit using materials harvested from asteroids, whereas the people aboard that craft could be sustained using harvested water and the foodstuffs that water will help grow. Find a sustainable source of water in Earth's orbit, perhaps harvested from water reserves on the moon or taken from a captured asteroid or comet, and humanity can turn outward to the stars, where the only factor standing in our way is the limit of our own ambition. From the moment our sun first formed in a nebula to the moment that inanimate matter first came to life, water has been of ultimate importance to the long story that we Earthlings are now part of. Water is everywhere. Water is fundamental. Water is both our past and our future. Where there is water, humanity may one day explore. And if water is the thing that unifies every corner of our known universe, then there's no place that humanity can't go.